Hello and welcome to another Stellarian Games video. In this episode, we're going to be talking about an Aetherwood tree. This has been kind of a project that I've been building up to over the last several builds. I've worked on a floating island, I've worked on trees, I've worked on all sorts of different things. And I wanted to kind of put it all together into really the project that I was aiming to do all along, which is this Aetherwood tree. At some point, I'm hoping to do kind of a lore video to explain more about the tree itself. But for this video, we're just going to do the construction. So let's go to the crafting table and see how it's done. To begin this project, we're going to be using some wire and making a similar floating island as my previous floating island video. So this is just creating the wire legs for the floating island. These will be made to look like roots coming through the bottom of the island, which are really the roots of the tree itself. This one is going to be a little bit different from my previous floating island in that it will be sitting on a full base rather than just on individual legs. Now that we have the wire all formed into the legs, we're just creating a hot glue core that will be kind of the place where we attach the actual legs to the styrofoam at some point. Now we're just doing a quick trace out of the legs on some styrofoam, 1/2 inch XPS foam. And this will be kind of the start of the base for the island. Just cutting that out with a knife and cutting out the inside as well. The inside will be made to look like a hole where the island pulled itself out of the earth and filled with water. We're just beveling the edges both on the inside and outside. And we're leaving enough space on that styrofoam to cut out a spot for the batteries later on. Now we're marking this out on some MDF. This will form the hard base underneath the styrofoam. Once that's cut out, now we're marking where the battery pack is going to be located, just using an X-Acto knife to cut out the hole for the battery pack. Now we're going to actually start forming the island itself. So rough cutting out the rough size underneath the island and cutting in notches where the legs are going to kind of fall through the island itself. Once that's about right, then we'll cut out the inside as well. That's where the hot glue will actually nestle into. Now, actually starting the shaping process, giving it the rock texture and feel for the bottom of the island. Once I have that layer, just adding one more layer to give it some depth, cutting it out and shaping it. And then using my fingers to kind of give it the same texture across both layers so that they kind of mesh together. And then adding the top layer, this is where the tree will actually be sitting on. This will be a much bigger layer, so I'm trying to cut this really wide. Again, using my fingers to try to keep the seamless texture between layers. Now I'm giving some texture to the top face of it as well, creating some notches and also some rock outcroppings on the top of the island. And then just using a knife to bevel down the island so that it's not just a flat surface. Now using the knife to cut all the way through that top layer, this will be where the tree sits into, as well as where the wires run up into the tree. Again, giving it some more texture between layers so it all feels like the same island between layers and you don't notice the the different layers of styrofoam. Just gluing that first 2 layers together and then gluing that to the legs. Now we're just texturing the bottom surround around the pool as well. And gluing the bottom onto the MDF. Then gluing the feet onto the styrofoam as well. So that'll lock in the feet onto that surrounding styrofoam. Now we're going to start running the wires for the fairy lights up the leg of one of those roots and gluing it so that the battery pack is accessible in the little hole. We can pull it out and replace batteries, yet it'll be tucked in and out of the way. Now we're starting the wire construct of the tree itself. I'm just grabbing some fencing wire and wrapping in pairs of wires into rough shapes of the tree, and then duct taping those pairings together to give the overall wire armature of the tree. This is not a very detailed wire armature tree. I added a few extra wires here and there, but overall it's pretty crude. Now I'm running those fairy lights up around the branches and then coming down and leaving the light exposed, hanging down below the branches, and then running the wire to the next branch and hanging that wire as well. Once all of that's in place, I start coating the entire tree in hot glue. Just the whole thing is covered in hot glue, pretty much head to toe, except for the fairy light tips themselves. Once all of that has a big thick layer of hot glue, I went and added roots as well as some texture to the tree to give it kind of a bark look. And then came back and added a little bit more texture. I wasn't satisfied with how thick some of the branches were, so I added a little bit more thickness and texture to all of the branches. I'm just shaping some kind of boulders that will be stuck to the underside of the island. This will help camouflage the layers between the styrofoam as well, and give it some more interesting texture rather than just all kind of chopped out by hand. Creating the lid for the battery pack, just kind of roughly shaping the top of a mound that'll fit right over the battery pack. Adding a little boulder to the top of it that'll act as the handle to the battery pack. Now I'm just going in with some white glue and adding lots and lots of white glue, and we'll kind of brush that in to place as well, and we'll pour sand to give it some texture for the ground. We'll do the same thing with the layer around the pool on the bottom. I'm using some white glue and wrapping some string around the roots. This will act as additional runner roots coming off of the main trunks of the roots. Using that same string and wrapping around the fairy lights to give them some kind of stem to the flowers. The lights themselves will be kind of flowers. Once that's dry, I'm just using masking tape to cover the lights so that when I'm painting, I don't accidentally paint over the lights. And I'm also using some blue tack on the trunk where I have some embedded lights. I wanted some light to shine through the trunk itself, so I'm using the blue tack to kind of mask when I put the paint on. Now I'm coating the entire thing with a black Mod Podge mixture, black paint and Mod Podge mixture. That'll help seal the entire piece and give it the base coat. I didn't end up going into the pool initially, but then I decided I might as well put the black down as well to give it the depth of the pool. Now I'm using brown to do a dry brush. I use some of that to kind of ease into the pool to give it some depth look in the pool itself, and then some lighter tan to add a little bit more of a highlight to all of the rock texture. Then coming through with some gray, doing another highlight, highlighting all of the rocks and boulders exposed, and just hitting some of the highlight areas. Then I'm using a dark brown to come back over the roots and make sure that they stood out a little bit differently than the lighter highlighted rocks around it. Once all the paint is dry, I took the tape off and then touched up where the blue tack was over the lights in the trunk. I didn't want it to be so exposed, I just wanted a little light peeking through the base. I'm using a lighter tan, kind of a coffee color, to highlight the tree, give it a little more texture. And then the entire piece is coated with a black wash. That'll help a lot of the boulders and other textures kind of pop. Once all of that is dry, came back through with another gray, just hit some of the highlights on the rocks. Now I'm using some fiber optic pieces from one of the fiber optic lamps and some hot glue, and attaching that right to the end of the fairy light, right on the LED. That way the light will carry down through the fiber optics. These will eventually be painted to look like flowers, so this will be kind of the flower and stamen kind of a approach. It could be used as fruit as well. Not sure exactly which direction I'm going to go, but I just like the look of it overall. Each of those little hot glue bulbs is painted a purple to begin with, and then a white coat was applied as well to give it sort of a white petal look for the flowers. Now I'm pulling apart some fine steel wool. This will be used as the foliage up above, kind of twisting into kind of a branch and then splaying it out as if it's the foliage extending. Each of those is coated in a dark brown spray paint, just to give it a base coat. And then coated in a spray adhesive, and then sprinkle on some foliage. As that dries, we're going to go give some foliage to the entire island as well. This will be flocking of a different color for the grasses around the tree. Once that's dried, I went back through and kind of touched in some more white glue and added some static grass just to break up some of the monotony of the other foliage, and also added some tufts of grass. Once all that's set, I went back through and added the foliage to the trees. So I used those kind of wrapped ends to kind of match into the branches, and then where it wasn't glued, I just nipped off the end of that twisted wire. Then for the pool itself, I'm just using some acrylic caulk to give it the texture of water. I wanted it to be a little bit different than just kind of a gloss coat that I've done in the past. If I were going to do it again, I'd probably go a little bit thinner on this caulk coat. It ended up not really sealing entirely clear. It ended up staying a slightly milky color, which I wish it would have sealed a little bit better. Once the caulk is coated, I added a gloss coat as well, and that'll just give it a more liquid feel to the pool. Here's the finished product. I really enjoyed working on this. I was really excited to be able to build this one. This one has been on my to-do list for a while, so I'm very happy to see it completed and can't wait to use it on the tabletop. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the subscribe button and the like button down below. And while you're at it, you can check out some of the other videos that I have on the Stellarian Games channel. Thank you, and hope to see you again next time.